The high Nevada desert doesn't offer much in the way of mercy. It's a land of jagged rock and heat that can melt the resolve off a man's bones. Silas Thorne knew that heat. He'd lived in it for 15 years, tucked away in a cabin that sat on the edge of a world that had forgotten him. He was whittling a piece of cedar on his porch when he saw the shape. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, a heat shimmer dancing off the alkali flats. But the shape had a rhythm, a stagger. It was human. She didn't scream. She didn't have the moisture left in her throat for that. When she reached the edge of his porch, she simply collapsed. Silas was on his feet before his whittling knife hit the floorboards. He turned her over. Her face was a road map of exhaustion. Skin parched white, lips split and bleeding, eyes sunken back into her skull like twin shadows. She looked like she'd walked halfway across hell and found it too crowded. He lifted her head, offering a canteen. She took a single, desperate swallow, coughing as the water hit her parched throat. Then she reached out, her fingers thin, trembling, and stained with something dark that might have been old blood. Clutched his forearm with a strength that shouldn't have been there. "Will you take me away from here?" she whispered. The words were raw. They weren't a request. They were a prayer. Silas looked out at the horizon. There was nothing out there but dust and the ghosts of men he'd buried long ago. He looked back at her. He didn't know her name. He didn't know where she'd come from. But Silas Thorne was a man who had spent a lifetime trying to outrun his own shadow. He knew that look. "I'll take you in," Silas said, his voice like gravel grinding on stone. "The rest, we'll see about the rest." He carried her inside. He didn't know it then, but the storm he'd been avoiding for 15 years had just walked through his front door. Silas Thorne was 56 years old, and he felt every day of it. He had a badge and cigar box under his floorboards, a piece of tin he hadn't worn since the day the law stopped being about right and started being about whoever had the most gold. He lived a life of deliberate silence. He woke up with the sun. He drank his coffee bitterly. He mended fences that didn't really need mending, just to keep his hand from shaking. For the first 3 days, the woman, she said her name was Elena, mostly slept. When she was awake, she sat by the window, watching the trail that led up from the valley. She flinched every time the wind caught the shutters. She ate like she expected someone to snatch the plate away at any second. Silas didn't ask questions. In the West, questions were a good way to get a man killed, or worse, to make him care. He just watched the way she held her hands. They were steadying now. The tremors were fading. She started doing small things. She cleaned the soot off the lanterns. She mended a tear in his oval coat with stitches so fine they were nearly invisible. "You're good with a needle," Silas remarked one evening, sitting across from her at the small pine table. Elena didn't look up from her work. "My father was a tailor in St. Louis. He used to say a good stitch can hold anything together, even a broken life." "Is that what you're doing here, Elena? Sewing something back together?" She finally looked at him. Her eyes weren't just tired anymore. They were sharp, wary. "I'm trying to outrun the unraveling, Mr. Thorne. Isn't that what we're both doing?" Silas didn't answer. He just looked at the fire. He thought about the men he'd chased when he wore the badge. Most of them weren't monsters. They were just people who had run out of options and decided to make their own. He wondered which one she was. On the 4th day, the supplies ran low. Silas needed flour, salt, and a fresh tin of tobacco. The nearest town was Oak Haven, a dusty collection of buildings that called itself a city, but felt more like a graveyard waiting for residents. "Stay inside," Silas told her as he saddled his horse. "Keep the door barred. If you see dust on the trail, you go out the back and head for the rocks. You don't wait to see who it is." Elena nodded. She looked small standing in the doorway, wrapped in one of his oversized shirts. "Why are you helping me, Silas?" He tightened the cinch on the saddle. He didn't look at her. "Maybe I just got tired of being the only ghost in this house." The ride to Oak Haven took 3 hours. The town was quiet, the midday sun pinning the shadows to the dirt. Silas went to the general store, nodding to the clerk. He was picking out a slab of bacon when his eyes drifted to the board near the door. The sheriff used it for notices, land auctions, lost cattle, and the wanted posters. One was newer than the rest. The ink was still dark, the paper crisp against the weathered wood. Silas felt a coldness settle in his gut that had nothing to do with the shade of the porch. There was a sketch. It wasn't perfect, but the eyes were unmistakable. Wanted, dead or alive. Clara the Crow Vance. $1,000 reward. The crimes were listed in bold, black type. Bank robbery. Murder of a Federal Marshal. Conspiracy against the territory. Silas felt the weight of the badge under his floorboards. He remembered the blood on her fingers the day she arrived. He remembered the way she watched the trail. $1,000. In 1888, that was enough to buy a kingdom, or a man's soul. He didn't buy the tobacco. He finished his business, kept his head down, and rode out of town. The dust from his horse's hooves felt like it was choking him. If you stayed with us this far, you're the kind of person who knows that out here. The truth is rarely as simple as ink on a page. Before we find out what Silas does when he gets back to that cabin, do me a favor. Tap that like button. It helps these stories of the old West find the people who need to hear them. And while you're there, I want to ask you something. If you found a stranger at your door and later found out they were a monster according to the law, would you turn them in? Or would you trust the person you'd shared bread with for the last 4 days? Tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. I read every one of them. It's quiet out here on the ranch, and your stories keep us company. Now, let's head back to that cabin. Silas is almost home, and he's not alone. When Silas rode back into the yard, the sun was dipping low, turning the Nevada sky the color of a fresh bruise. He didn't unhook his horse. He walked straight onto the porch, the wanted poster folded tight in his pocket. He pushed open the door. Elena, or Clara, was at the stove. The smell of frying salt pork filled the room. It felt like home. That was the most dangerous part. "You're back early. I saw a friend of yours in town," Silas said. She went still. The sizzle of the pan seemed to grow louder in the silence. She didn't turn around. She didn't try to run. "His name was Marshal Miller," Silas continued. "The poster says you killed him in cold blood during a robbery in Carson City." He pulled the paper out and laid it on the table. Clara finally turned. She looked at the poster, then at him. She didn't look like a killer. She looked like someone who had been waiting for the end of the world and was relieved it had finally arrived. "I didn't rob that bank, Silas. The law says differently. $1,000 says something different. Marshal Miller was my husband's brother," she said, her voice trembling but her eyes held steady. "My husband was the bookkeeper for the mining company. He found out the governor was skimming the payroll, stealing from the men who go down in the dark every day. They killed my husband to keep him quiet. Miller was the only one who believed me. He was trying to get me to the border with the Ledgers, the men the governor sent. They killed Miller. They pinned it on me so no one would listen to what I had to say." She reached into the folds of her dress and pulled out a small, leather-bound book. "This is why I'm a murderer, Silas. Not because I took a life, but because I have the truth." Silas looked at the book. He'd seen this play before. He'd seen men with badges do terrible things in the name of order. "You expect me to believe that?" Silas asked. "I expect you to do what you're going to do," she said. She walked over to the table and sat down. She looked tired again. "If you're going to take me back, let me finish my supper. I'd like to be full when they hang me." Silas didn't have time to answer. The sound of hooves hit the yard. Not one horse. 3. Fast. Silas moved with a grace he hadn't used in a decade. He blew out the lantern in one breath and grabbed the shotgun from over the door. "Get under the floorboards," he hissed. "Now!" "Silas." "Go!" He shoved her toward the spot where his old badge was hidden. He heard the boards creak as she dropped down. He kicked the rug over her just as a voice boomed from the yard. "Thorne, we know you're in there. Don't make this hard on yourself. Old man." Silas stepped out onto the porch. 3 men sat in their saddles. They weren't lawmen. They were bounty hunters. You could tell by the way they dressed. Too much fringe, too many guns, and eyes that looked like they were counting coins. The man in the center was tall, with a ginger beard and a hat pulled low. My name is Miller, not the marshal. I'm the cousin who gets the dirty work. We're looking for a girl, Clara Vance. Never heard of her, Silas said. He held a shotgun across his lap, casual but ready. The clerk in town says you spent a long time looking at her poster today, and someone saw a woman matching her description riding toward these hills 4 days ago. People see a lot of things in the heat, Silas said. Usually it's just a mirage. Ginger Beard smirked. He rested a hand on the butt of his revolver. $8,000 is a mirage. Step aside. We're going to search the house. This is my land, Silas said. His voice was quiet, but it had the edge of a razor. You don't have a warrant. You don't have a badge. You just have a greedy heart. And that doesn't get you past my front door. The two men on the flanks shifted their weight. One of them reached for a rifle. Silas didn't wait. He wasn't a young man, but he was a man who knew exactly how much a life was worth. He fired the shotgun into the dirt in front of the lead horse. The animal reared, screaming. Gingerbeard struggled to keep his seat. The next one goes into the brisket. Silas shouted, "Ride out, now, or you can find out how many of you I can take with me before I go down." In the West, there's a specific kind of Mexican standoff. It's the moment when the bounty isn't worth the price of the coffin. The three men looked at Silas. They saw the way he held that gun. They saw the eyes of a man who had already died once and wasn't afraid to do it again. "This isn't over, Thorne." Gingerbeard spat. He settled his horse. "You're harboring a fugitive. That makes you a dead man walking." They turned their horses and rode back into the dark. Silas waited until the sound of the hooves was a distant memory. He went inside and lifted the rug. Clara climbed out. She was shaking now, the adrenaline fading into a cold terror. She looked at Silas, and for the first time, she saw him. Not the rancher, not the hermit, but the man he used to be. "They'll be back," she said. "They'll bring more men. You can't stay here." Silas walked over to the corner of the room and pried up the floorboard. He reached past the spot where she'd been hiding and pulled out the cigar box. He opened it. The silver badge caught the moonlight through the window. "I'm not staying," Silas said. He pinned the badge to his vest. It felt heavy. It felt right. "What are you doing?" "The governor thinks he can use the law to hide his crimes. He thinks a wanted poster is the same thing as the truth. I spent 20 years teaching men like him that the law doesn't belong to man with the most gold. It belongs to the people who have to live under it." He looked at her. "You asked me to take you away from here. Well, the border is 2 days' ride, but there's a judge in Sacramento who still remembers my name. He's a man who likes his truth served cold." Clara wiped a tear from her cheek. She stood up straight. She looked like her father's daughter now, ready to hold the stitches together. "Why, Silas? You could have had $1,000. You could have stayed here in peace." Silas walked to the door and looked out at the desert. The stars are coming out, millions of them, cold and bright. "Peace isn't the absence of war, Clara. It's knowing you're on the right side of it." He turned back to her. "Saddle the mare. We leave at midnight." They rode out under the cover of a new moon. Two shadows against the vastness of the Nevada desert. They had a long road ahead of them. They had men behind them who wouldn't stop until they were silenced. But as they hit the open trail, Silas Thorne felt something he hadn't felt in 15 years. He didn't feel the weight of his regrets. He didn't feel the ache in his bones. He felt like a man with a purpose. You see, that's the thing about the West. It's a place that can break you. It's a place that can turn your heart to stone and make you forget why you ever care about the world in the first place. But all it takes is one decision, one moment of not walking away. Clara Vance was a wanted woman. Silas Thorne was a retired man. But out here, labels are just dust in the wind. What matters is what you do when the world asks you to step up. Who are you in this story? Are you the one watching the poster, counting the gold? Or are you the one who sees the person behind the ink? If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you that justice is something we build with our own two hands, then give us a like. Share this story with someone who needs a little courage today. And make sure you hit that subscribe button, because out here in the West, the stories never truly end. They just keep riding toward the next horizon. Grab your canteen, check your cinches, and we'll see you on the next trail. Stay brave, and keep your eyes on the truth.